You're listening to Nutrition Matters podcast with Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist. Nutrition Matters podcast explores how to approach food and your body in a whole new way. I interview people who share stories and expertise in rejecting diet culture, making peace with food, and discovering a more positive, realistic, and sustainable approach to health and well-being. I'm Paige Smathers, registered dietitian nutritionist and owner of Positive Nutrition, an in-person nutrition therapy practice in Salt Lake City, Utah. I offer free resources, including this podcast, a blog, and posts on social media. If you're local to Salt Lake City, check out our services and availability for appointments, and keep your eyes out for in-person groups on mindfulness, intuitive eating, body image resilience, and more. Go to positive-nutrition.com and hit subscribe if you'd like to keep in touch. I also offer online courses covering topics like the science of nutrition, mindfulness, and healing your relationship with food. Check those out at positive-nutrition.com/academy. If you like what you hear on the podcast, you can make a difference by leaving a review, sharing with friends and family, or making a donation. Thank you so much for your support. You can also find me on Instagram or Facebook if you'd like to have a little more food for thought at Paige Smathers RD. Thank you so much for listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast. My name is Paige, and I'm your host. And today I'm sharing a conversation I had with Shauna Spence, a registered dietitian in New York. We talked about kind of other elements of our health and well-being besides nutrition and how those things can really impact our ability to feed ourselves, our ability to care for ourselves, and just our overall sense of well-being. So I love this conversation because I think it's really common in our world and in our culture to kind of, when we think about health, we usually think about food and nutrition first, and maybe even exercise too. But we don't always consider the importance of those things in context of other elements of our world and of our existence, that when we have those things in balance and we feel like those things we're giving time and energy to other elements of our well-being, that it's kind of like a positive feedback loop. It makes it easier when you get a good night's sleep. It makes it easier to, prepare yourself food and connect to your body, just for example. Or when you feel like you're able to laugh and have a good time, like that just can give you a sense of, a break and ease and fun that you also need in your life just as much as you need food and rest and sleep and all those other things. So I really love this conversation because I talk about this kind of stuff a lot with my clients, and I think it's really important for us to think about all the other elements of our health and wellness as we're considering our nutrition as well. So just a quick reminder, if these podcast episodes resonate and if you enjoy them and if you'd like to support the work that I'm doing here, there is an option to become a supporter of the podcast, and you can do that just by clicking the link in any of the recent show notes. And for $5 a month, you'll get 3 extra podcast episodes per month. So one is a guided meditation, one is a nutrition lesson, and one is a Q&A episode. So if that seems like something you'd like to do, and if you could, if $5 feels like an amount that you could donate, that would be greatly appreciated. Thank you to those who have donated already, and I hope that you are enjoying that exclusive podcast feed. It's been fun for me to put that together and to hear your questions and to think about how I might be able to support you best. And then, as always, thank you for those of you who leave reviews and who share these episodes with friends and family. That's always really appreciated. And if you'd like to dive deeper into some of the topics, you're always welcome to check out the Positive Nutrition Academy, where I house longer form online courses and shorter form webinars that are cheaper and just about an hour long. And you can do those at your leisure at home. They're all self-paced. They're all ready to go. So yeah, check out those online resources as well. And then, as always, there is an in-person practice that I run in Salt Lake City, Utah. I have 2 other dietitians who work with me, and we are now in network with multiple insurance companies. So that's kind of a fun update over the last few months. So if you feel like you need that individualized help, you're always welcome to reach out as well. Okay, well, thank you to my guest, Shauna, for joining me. She is such a delight. I just really, really enjoy her, and I hope you enjoy listening to this conversation. Thanks again for being here. Hi, Shauna. Welcome to Nutrition Matters podcast, and thanks so much for joining me.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So take a minute and talk about who you are and what you do, and then I'll ask you some more questions about kind of how you got here.
Okay, so right now, of course I am a dietitian. I am based in Brooklyn, New York. I actually work like a 9 to 5 job in public health, but I do counseling on the side, and I find that taking like an intuitive eating haze approach is kind of ideal for most of my clients. So that's kind of what I concentrate on, and I'm just a big believer in it. Um, and that's really what I do. I also have an Instagram, which seems kind of like a third job, actually. So I have like my public health, the counseling, and I feel like Instagram is like my third job. But I do like to put out messages just based on body positivity, Haze aligned eating, intuitive eating, just because I feel like that works best. In my opinion, I know a lot of people would disagree, but I feel like that kind of method just works for most people. So I do like to promote it.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you put it that way, that it works best, because a lot of people can kind of mistakenly kind of believe that people like you and me might practice from that perspective because it's like because somehow, I don't know, it can kind of feel almost anti-health, where people can kind of
Mm-hmm.
wonder, why would a dietitian be, promoting or talking about things from this perspective? And it can kind of feel confusing, especially when this is maybe a bit of a paradigm shift for people. And so
Mm-hmm.
what you just said really stood out to me, because that's one of the things that I always like to explain to my clients is, look, I'm not bringing this up because like it's trendy or it's fun or it's necessarily even like fun and new and sexy or exciting or whatever. It's really
Mm-hmm.
because it actually works
Yeah.
best. It actually is most likely going to help you find a groove with food that feels sustainable and health promoting and positive and grounded. And so yeah, like is that your experience too?
Definitely. Like everything that you just said, because a lot of times people kind of misinterpret. I think that movement, especially with intuitive eating, a lot of times, of course, I think you probably heard this too. Like we all get that comment, oh, well, my body's telling me to just eat fries all the time. And it's like, well, that's really not what the movement is about, but you can definitely have fries. I think that if you ate fries every day, you'd probably get tired of them. So it really is just about kind of listening to your body and just, following the hunger cues, but also just eating whatever you're already eating your day to day is fine. It's just about kind of working in this movement about adding things in. That's kind of how I approach, I think, counseling with my clients in particular. I don't do meal plans actually. I just kind of look and take whatever they're eating during the time and I say, okay, this is what we can do. This is what we can add in. So it's still kind of that intuitive eating, still eating foods that they like, but it's about seeing what we can add in or maybe shift around. So, and that approach I find also kind of relaxes people because, I mean, let's face it, like dietitian, it's a scary word. I think a lot of times people kind of think, oh my gosh, she's going to tell me like I can't have my, hot dogs or like my cake or whatever. And it's, and I always say, no, you can have all of that. But it's kind of working with us to kind of figure out what you can add in to get your body healthy. So that's kind of the
Yes.
perspective that I
Adding
take.
in rather than taking away. And not
Yeah.
only is that like super practical, but it's also,
Hmm.
it sets you up psychologically so much more sustainably to do things long term, where it's like if you feel like you have to deprive or restrict yourself, that's only there's only so long that can last. And that's why we see the statistics we do about the long-term effects of dieting is it just doesn't really last, and it doesn't make sense, and it doesn't feel good. It feels like punishing, and it feels discouraging. But this idea of adding rather than taking away is so much more like aligned with like a positive psychology too, which is,
Hmm.
when we try to make nutrition just about what we eat, we're really missing the big picture because it's so much about how we're thinking about food and our bodies and ourselves and our identity. And like all of this stuff outside of food becomes a really important thing to consider when we're thinking about nutrition and food as well.
Agreed. Totally.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, how did you come to this space? How did you find intuitive eating?
So this is actually, so I'm kind of new, I guess, to dietetics. This is my second career, and I actually didn't find out about intuitive eating or haze or any of this until I became a dietitian. So I didn't, they don't teach us that, I'm sure, as you know, in school, in our studies, in our internship, they really don't teach this approach. So I did actually have to do my own research, and just based on kind of how I figured out how to eat best, because I did suffer from sort of that eating disorder, body dysmorphia, and I kind of had to, I don't want to say like the word fix, but I didn't really receive like actual counseling for it, so I kind of
Okay.
had to do do my own research. So that's kind of how I found this movement. Just doing my research, going on Instagram, finding accounts, and just like going off of that and really diving into it. So I'm so happy that I did, because I think like I said before, I think that it works, if you work with the right person also. So.
Yeah, for sure. So
Hmm.
it's personal too. It's not just a professional thing. I mean, and that's true for all of us. We
Hmm.
all eat, right? So we can't just say that
Right.
nutrition is only
True.
professional. And we all have our own
Right.
relationships with food too. And just because you're a dietitian doesn't automatically make it easy to feed yourself, either from a logistical perspective or a body image perspective or any of the other elements. It's nobody is immune to struggling with these things. So that's interesting to have you
Mhm.
kind of share that experience of that personal meaning of health at every size and intuitive eating. I agree. It's also personally meaningful
Hmm.
to me too.
Hmm.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So tell us about like what made you want to become a dietitian? What's interesting to
Mm.
you about nutrition?
So I used to, I did like a total 180. So I used to actually work in fashion. Um, didn't really like it that much, so I decided to change. But what prompted me to explore nutrition in the first place was just because I was fully aware, even though I wasn't in the field, of just the inequality in access to food. Also seeing the inequality with chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease, and kind of trying to see like why there was so much imbalance. And when I say that, I mean like in low income areas. So I really wanted to explore that, and I figured, you know what? I need to actually become an expert in this. So I really did want to change careers, and that's kind of why I still do have my 9 to 5 job in public health, just because I do love what I do, aside from the counseling as well. So that's kind of what sparked, I think, the interest, and me kind of doing my own research and saying, you know what, I think I want to do this full time. I want to kind of go out and help people. So I just like jumped in, made the plunge, quit my job, went back to school. So I mean, it was a lot more than what it sounds like, because we
Yeah.
have schooling, and then you have the internship, and then the test and all that. But yes, but altogether, I decided to kind of just shift my focus.
Okay, and this is one of the things I really love about you. It was so funny. I asked you to send me your bio, and it was hilarious. It was like the
Hmm.
funniest bio I've ever read. Like and then that's true just in anything I see from you, like on social media. You
Hmm.
just seem to have such a good sense of humor, and you're just willing to kind of like keep it light, but you're not afraid of hard conversations either, right? It's not like you're
No,
avoiding
yeah,
or
yeah.
being, unwilling to have difficult conversations. But I just really appreciate your voice for that reason. Is that kind of how you see yourself too, or?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I don't even know. Like, I'm sure, like an actual therapist can talk about why I am the way I am. But all I know is that I just, in general, like to keep things lighthearted. Listen, especially now, like with the world, and its issues, I just think that having a sense of humor has always been my style. And I always tell people I'm the first one to kind of make fun of myself. Like I'm not like the mean, jokester. Like I make fun of myself before anything. And I just feel like that kind of sets the energy and the tone for whoever, like whether it's friends, family, like any kind of conversation. My clients, I just want them to know that it's okay to talk to me. Because I am like this, like it's not even like a front. This is how I am. So that, just to make it lighthearted, because seeing any kind of health professional, I think is scary and intimidating. Even seeing a doctor, like, let's face it, I get super nervous about going to doctors visits. So I just want them to know it's okay. Like we can talk about this. We can smile through this. Like it's okay. So
Yeah,
hopefully
and
I
you know
give
what I
off
love
that
about
energy.
that is
Yeah.
I think there's so many issues with our culture as we all know.
Mhm.
But I think one of them that just feels really toxic is this obsession with productivity. And I
Mhm.
think as a result of that, it's how we measure our worth and it's how we think of our work, especially is like it's only good if it's, you know, cause or having X, Y, and Z result, right?
Right,
But
right.
in kind of recent years, I've been really trying to kind of rediscover things that aren't super necessarily quote unquote productive, but that
Mm-hmm.
actually feel really important and feel really health promoting. And I'll list a couple of them, and I'm just interested in your thoughts on it too. So,
Sure,
one of
sure.
them would be rest, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, rest feels like the
Definitely.
opposite of productivity, but,
Mm-hmm.
but slash and I found that it is absolutely critical in my ability to even like paradoxically be productive and also just to feel balanced and grounded. So rest is one, humor is one. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think of it as like, oh, I'll get to that if I have time. It's like, no, I actually need to laugh. Like that's actually
Right,
so
right.
important
Yeah.
for my health. Like we want to talk about apples and salads or, and vegetables so
Yeah.
much, but we don't really want to
That's
talk about
right.
like
Yeah.
our beliefs about productivity or our thoughts about rest or humor or play, just like literally
Mm-hmm.
just playing something just for fun. What like when did that become hard for me? And I don't like that, like I want to be able to play. So those like
Yeah, same.
rest, play, and humor have been three things that
Mm-hmm.
I've had on my mind quite a bit in the last few years, kind of looking at how that kind of weaves into my beliefs about productivity. And I'm interested, have you had a similar experience or journey or thoughts about that?
Definitely. Rest for sure. And if I'm completely honest, I'm trying to work on that still. So it's definitely still a progress for
All of
me,
this
or
is
a progress, I
ongoing
should
for
say.
me too, totally.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Right. We're like not perfect. But and and it's something that I do. It's like advice that I give, but also advice that I'm trying to take myself. And I'm very honest with anyone who opinion on like sleep or like you said rest, taking off days. I'm like, no, your body needs it. And meanwhile I'm like, Shauna, like you just said this, like you need to do this too. So just because I notice with myself when I'm not fully rested, it just affects everything. It affects my day. And that just also affects our eating habits too. I personally don't like to use the term like stress eating, but it sort of is like that, right? We get like super stressed and we're not really paying attention to what we're putting in our bodies. And like I said, you can eat anything, but sometimes there's like also a fullness that needs to come with it. Like, are we actually sitting at the table? Like, it doesn't matter what you're what you're eating, but are like you sitting at a table? Are you like taking in your surroundings? Are you looking at your plate? So practicing this sort of mindfulness doesn't really even matter what's on your plate. Just like practicing, being in the moment. And I think that comes with rest, either sleeping or even taking the day off. Like this is personal again. I just think that like within American culture in general, we're work all the time. Not even just like 9 to 5, like weekends. Like you're expected to just work, 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 work. And it's like, yes, we all want to make a living, but at the same time, what are we doing to our bodies? I think was it New Zealand? So I think it was New Zealand where their prime minister, she like initiated or was speaking about like a 4-day work week instead of 5. And it was like mind blowing to us, just because we're so used to like constantly working. And it's, why do we have that mentality? So it's just something to think about. Just because I notice when I take a day off, I feel like so refreshed, especially like getting a full night's sleep. You just feel so refreshed, and it really does make a difference.
You're so right.
In my
And, I've been listening to
Yeah.
a lot of podcasts about the future of work, especially with, being right smack dab in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And kind of like there's a really interesting article, I forget where it was published, but it was about this journalist or historian, I forget, sorry, I'm not totally up on the details, but looked at kind of the history of the working from home movement. And he was talking about how there's been a push to get people to be able to work from home, but then there's been these barriers of like just technological issues. And then with the advent of the computer, that kind of made some of that go away. But then there was kind of this mistrust of employees, and are they really going to get things done? And there's some other barriers to work through. But now that we are many of us are being kind of forced into this big experiment of and just making it working from home. There's a lot of people kind of calling into question some of the expectation of like of constantly being on call and constantly answering emails and constantly, basically working all the time, and how much this affects our health and our well-being, especially when we're not having this separation of like the ritual of driving to work or commuting to work and the ritual of coming home. And, it's all just at home, and there's no real separation between work and home. There needs to be more structures in place to like give us that chance to rest and that chance to feel a sense of balance and a sense of being grounded. And these conversations about productivity to me right now, I mean, they've always felt really important, but to me right now feel extra important because of just the situation many of us are finding ourselves in is very, very unprecedented and different from the past.
Totally. Because I mean, why should we have, we're all stressed out, like whether some of us are admitting to it or not, we're in the middle of a pandemic. And so it's scary because we don't know the outcome, and that's stressful. And I think that stress does affect our body so much. And I don't think people realize how much it can affect your body and, your like gut, your microbiome, like your sleep and all of that. It's just all related. And, it's not talked about a ton, but it definitely should be because, like I said, I don't think people realize how much of that has an effect.
Yeah.
But yeah.
What are some things you've done to work on either rest in your own world or humor or play? And I would define play as like doing something just for fun, So that could be like art or creativity but just what are some instances in your world where you feel like you've really done this and felt good about kind of integrating more of this into your world? And by the way, I just want to say too, before you answer, I definitely noticed a big shift from being a student to being a working person.
Oh, yes.
Just such a transition from this life
Definitely.
of constant work, constant studying, constant, trying to cram things into your brain and go, go, go as a student. And
Hmm.
then, obviously there's things that are harder about being a working person, but you really do have a little bit more time, at least hopefully, if you're doing it right.
Right, right,
And
exactly.
it's kind of a weird thing to transition into a new phase of life where you're allowed to do things for fun. And in fact,
Mhm.
you realize that's important. And productivity isn't who I am. And then finding out who am I outside of getting things done or my job or anyway, I would love anything you have to share about that experience, that transition for you.
Definitely. Like you said, when I was not so much the undergrad, but definitely when I was in the middle of doing the actual switch of my career, and I went back and got my master's. I went to a master's program for nutrition. Um, the I think it was just all the pressure of, first of all, being in school, being in those classes, like the organic chemistry, biochemistry that we had to take, like that pressure alone. Um, it was just like frantic. But also, I think I put extra pressure on myself because I was switching careers and I still was very uncertain about the outcome. I knew it's what I wanted to do, but I was like, what if this doesn't work out? What am I going to do? So I think I had that also just added to it, just added to being a student, But I found what helps for me anyway is just always finding, and I've always been kind of like a fairly active person, but I do remember that when I was a student, I did not get out and move or like exercise as much as I usually did. And I found that just like getting fresh air or like doing short things, like it does not have to be a 2 hour break or a 2 hour exercise session, but literally just taking like a 15-minute walk. Just for some reason, like I feel like that revives me, and that's a suggestion that I give to people all the time, because I don't think we realize, especially for those of us who are like so used to like working nonstop, that we need that rest. So I try to do that myself. That's also a suggestion that I give to other people. Just like take a walk, of course, weather and safety um, are important. But if you can do it, also finding something you love. Like if you love that creativity, I used to dance, so I still try to take dance classes. Of course, now with COVID, I can't actually go to a class, but I try to still keep it up like in my living room. It's not the most ideal,
That's
but
so
I do
fun.
find that it helps. It like clears my mind because it's doing something that I love. And it doesn't, and it can look different for everyone. Some people like to, I don't know, bike, or you like to go jogging, or even just like a stroll. Like people think that exercise is always just a sweat sesh, and it's not. It's just like moving your body. So just finding those little
Well,
outlets,
and
I always
the
find
mentality
helpful.
that exercise doesn't quote unquote count unless it's a sweat sesh, like we need to unpack that a little bit because that is the same exact mentality that we're trying to sort of work against, where it's the belief that, you know, it's a very transactional approach to life where it's like, okay, I will exercise as long as it quote unquote counts or it has a purpose. But this whole like idea of, and not to say that there isn't a purpose in rest or play or humor, there is, but it just finding a way to make it not as transactional is kind of the point, right? It's like it's liberating to realize, oh, I can go on a walk and sure, like there's some like physical things that will happen that are great, but a lot of the benefits that I get are beyond even like that transactional approach to our health and well-being. And as we move away
Hmm.
from that, we actually find ourselves engaging in behaviors more sustainably and in a way that's actually more health promoting, which I think is what makes it worth kind of doing this process of being mindful and being aware of the thoughts that you're having and kind of challenging beliefs, it's a lot of work. But if you realize, oh, I'm actually more likely to sustain like health promoting behaviors and patterns, whether that's rest or movement or food or hydration or sleep or whatever, more likely to keep doing those things when they aren't as transactional or all or nothing, and they're more grounded in what I actually want to be doing.
Totally. And honestly, I feel like that whole mentality with exercise of being like super, super sore after your workout or sweaty, like that just ties into that whole like diet culture mentality. Like it, because there's that mentality of, did I burn enough calories? Did I, like you just mentioned, does it count? And I think that's all tied together, because we're taught to like exercise just to burn off our calories, just to be able to eat things. We're not taught to just to move. So I think it's just all related. So it's a good conversation to have.
Yeah. And Shauna, your thought about the walk, I just wanted to mention, I learned something a few years ago that I really just love. And it's that our eyes, human eyes, are not really meant to be constantly focusing on stuff that's super up close, especially for long amounts of time. And so when you just feel fatigued and tired when you're staring at your computer or when you're studying for a test and you get the advice like just go out for a walk, resist the urge to turn that all into like, okay, now you're going to go like exercise and burn calories or whatever. There's actually evidence that just like, even if you can't go on a walk or you don't have time for a 15-minute walk, even standing up and looking out a window and looking off into the distance for a little bit of time fairly regularly throughout the day, there's evidence that that's actually really, really beneficial for our overall like nervous system and psychology and like our eyes. Like they need a break from looking so close at the computer. And so going outside, a little change of scenery, looking off into the distance, like that seems like, okay, what's the point of doing that? That's not quote unquote productive. But it's actually, it's one of those things that's like, no, that's totally worth taking the time to do because you come back feeling like rested and refreshed. And a lot of times there's actually, really cool science about letting your mind have some bored time, because that's actually, how many times have you come up with something that you've been just stressing over for so long? You come up with it right as you're falling asleep or right as you're taking a shower. These are your mind needs rest. And so that's one reason to rest, because it actually could help you be productive. But rest in itself is health promoting and something that you need. It's not something you get to if you have time.
Right. No, that's so true. There are those apps now too that kind of, but that would still be staring at your screen. But the point is to like make it more mindful. Like they tell you take a break, stretch or whatever. So at first I kind of find it annoying, but sometimes it's a good idea. Like, wait a second, I have been staring at the computer. Let me actually get up and stretch or look out the window, like you said. So I think, those are like great tips. It's a really good idea.
Thanks. Yeah. And then the other thing that you said that I just loved and I wanted to comment on is you're talking about how you love to dance and how you make that happen in your living room. That's so cool. I think sometimes when people, hear all these ideas of things that they can do, I've heard people say stuff like, well, I just don't even know what I care about or how I like to play or how I like to rest or laugh or whatever it is that they're working on. But one of the things that really helps me is when I think about what did I love to do as a kid? Like what did I couldn't wait to rip off my backpack and go outside and do, or even inside or whatever. And some of those things, I think if you're anything like me, might bring up some real weird inner criticisms and just negativity or even anxiety. Like an example would be, I've been painting. I've been doing watercolor with my kids, and I'm terrible at it. Like I'm not good at it. But but it's kind of like remembering it's okay. You're not supposed to be good. And like, who says that that's what this is even about?
Yeah,
Again,
doesn't
it's
have
not
to be.
transactional. It's not, I made this pretty picture. I'm going to show somewhere and I'm going to make money, or I'm going to make this a new hobby, or I'm going to do anything necessarily with this.
Right.
It's like the act of doing this is what has value. And that's been a fun thing for me to kind of reclaim. Another one is my husband's family recently gave us their family piano. And so we have that in our house now. And I've been sitting at the piano again. And I swear to you, I have very few things that get me into a state of flow,
Uh-huh.
but just like rediscovering how much I love piano has been so much fun for me.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, these are just some thoughts. Like, what did you love to do as a kid? And maybe it's moving, maybe it's creativity, maybe it's writing stories, maybe, maybe
Mm-hmm.
something like that. I think these are things that we've collectively as a culture kind of almost lost sight of. It's almost like if you're going to do something for fun, you have to post about it, or you have to get credit for it, or
Right.
you have to like get social capital as a result of this thing. And I think that there's some real power in just having stuff be just your own, and not everything's Instagrammable, you know?
Mm-hmm. That is such a good point. Social media, I mean, it has its definite good, but it also has this weird I don't even know how to like put it, but you definitely find yourself like looking at people's lives, right? And
Yeah.
comparing it, whether you realize it or not. So that's such a good point. Like, not everything is Instagrammable. I love it. It's true.
Yeah.
So true. Yeah.
Yeah. And everything I'm saying is stuff that I've had to work through too. So it's not like I'm
Hmm.
got this all figured out. I do find myself sometimes being like, oh, this would be fun to post. Like, I'm doing this fun, different thing that I normally don't do. But it's
Right,
kind of like,
right,
well, and then I have to ask myself why? Like, why do I want people to know that I'm doing that? And
right, right.
do I really want people to know that? Or can things just be mine? And like, I don't, just FYI, like, I don't look down on or think anything at all about people who share a lot or people who don't. Like, I don't think it's right or wrong
Same.
one way or
Hmm.
another, but I think it is worth asking yourself, like, what is this about for me? And
Yeah,
does that,
totally.
I think sometimes it turns some of the like resting or even like fun, joyous moments, like it can turn some of that beautiful, those moments that are so beautiful, it can kind of almost turn them into like a transactional thing where it's like, oh, I'm having so much fun and I need you to know how funny I
How,
am, or like
yeah,
how good I am at resting or whatever,
it's
you know?
true. It's so true. I mean, like you said, I'm thinking about like my daily activity now. Whenever I do post, and again, like I follow a very diverse, my feed is very diverse. So I do, because sometimes like trainers and those exercise fanatics can be, in my opinion, a bit too much, especially now. But there are some that I like to follow, and they literally post their workouts all the time. And I always think, I'm like, maybe I should, like, because I do get asked by clients, like you said, like, what can I do to start or motivate myself? I'm like, maybe I should do what or post what I do. And I'm like, wait a second, no, because that's me. And, like, I'll post like a couple dance videos just to remind people to move. But most of the time, like, I don't post every single time I'm going on a walk, because that's my like moment. When I'm in the
Yeah.
park, I just want to be present. I'm listening to music and everything, but like I don't feel the need to get the selfie, especially like, I mean, no one needs to see me in my mask sweating. Just to say that, yeah,
In
I
the
was out for a
humid New
walk.
York City summer.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's so humid here. No one needs to see that. So yeah, like you said, it like not everything is Instagrammable. Like that, I think that sums it up so perfectly.
Yeah, I love your
Uh,
thoughts on that too. And yeah, like everything we're saying, I hope people don't feel it as like a judgment thing. Like
oh, not at
it's
all.
okay
Yeah.
if you like to post a lot of that stuff.
Mhm.
I've just found it interesting to kind of sit back and kind of reflect on that, because it is really easy to get kind of in reactive mode with some of this stuff like, oh, everyone else does this, I'm going to do it too. And
Exactly.
meanwhile, you could go 20 steps down that road and be like, why do I feel terrible? Like, why do I not like the experience of being on social media? Or, um, and next thing you know, you could kind of turn into maybe someone that's not really you, or kind of feel like you're doing things just because you feel like you have to and it's not fun anymore. And maybe that's not the purpose of that for
Hmm.
you. So these are just things that are kind of continually floating through my mind. So it's really interesting to hear your reflections on that too.
Yeah,
That's one
definitely.
of the things, speaking of social media, that's one of the things I really enjoy about your content.
Mhm.
You have, I mean, like I said, you're willing to hit home and have tough conversations, but you're funny. You're
Oh,
funny. I love that. Like, and you make
thank you.
nutrition just like fun.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I try. I try. I to be completely honest, and this might be bad admitting, like I really don't have a theme or like a rhyme or rhythm about like my posts. It literally can be even that day that I'm thinking about something and I'll just write it down, or it be something that I'm reading about, or maybe a question a client has asked, or even a friend has asked, like suggestion. I'm just like, you know what? Let me talk on this, and I just like put in humor because that's just my personality. Like, I mean, I'm sure someone else, and there are lots of, dietitians on Instagram who say the same things, but we all kind of do things differently, which is great,
Yeah,
which is
different
what I love.
voices kind of
Yeah,
reaching different people for sure.
exactly, exactly. So
Well, I
yeah,
appreciate yours so much. It's just like, I don't know, there's been a couple times where I'm like, oh, that is so clever. That's such a good way to say that.
oh, thank you, thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, is there anything else that you would like to kind of add to this? I guess our theme today has been really talking about kind of the doing things for the sake of doing them that
Mhm.
aren't necessarily super productive, quote unquote, the way we think about it typically, but their role in sort of enhancing our health and our well-being and overall like impacting the way that we're able to nourish ourselves. It is affected by these things we've talked about. So, is there anything
Mhm.
else you'd like to add or anything we didn't really get to that you want to mention?
Well, I mean, just kind of as a recap, just to remind people, you know, and we're all gonna have stress. Like this time period, this 2020 has been a very stressful year. But we're always gonna have stress in our lives, and I think it's just really important to try to figure out how to deal with it, or like ways that work best for us. Like not just looking at what someone else is doing, but really trying to focus on what's working for your body, and that depends on nutrition, that depends on the movement, it depends on what you view your playtime as. It's just very individualized. And I just want them to know, like, whatever you're doing that works for you, keep doing it. That's really the whole point because our bodies are all different. They're not the same. And I think I've said this before. We can eat the same, we can exercise the same, we're not going to look the same, and that goes for everything that goes into it. So I guess that's my advice.
I love
Be
it.
you.
My parting message would
Yeah.
be just to add to what you just said would be think of the things that we've talked about today and maybe even make your own list. Like what are things that help you feel your very best, and make a list of things like maybe it's feeling understood or expressing yourself or um, having fun or having a sense of adventure or rest or humor, whatever, those types of things. Make a list of all those
Hmm.
things that kind of come to your mind and that feel important to you. And my advice would be to think of those things as not like, oh, I'll get to it when I have time, because you won't, right? And
Hmm.
you'll always never, which I know you're not supposed to say that, but you'll always never have time for
It's
those
true.
things. So this is about kind of prioritizing that and really thinking of those things as needs, not, oh, I'll get to it if I have time. That has been a really helpful thing for me, like thinking about rest, for example, or even humor or creativity as actual needs of mine has been a pretty helpful just kind of shift almost in like language, almost in how I'm thinking about it in my own head. So I would encourage you to think about these things as needs, make a list, and make a plan for how you're going to make time for these other needs outside of, your nutrition and your job or your school or your family obligations. Those are definitely needs too, but what about these other elements of who you are? And really starting to notice as you make time for those needs, how does that affect your health? How does that affect your well-being? How does that affect your sleep, your food, all that stuff? So that would be my parting thoughts.
Yeah, I love it. I love it.
Yay, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so talk for really quick about how people can keep in touch with you and follow along with your work, and maybe even work with you if they'd like to reach out. How can they get a hold of you?
Sure. So I'm definitely most active on Instagram. So my handle is the nutrition tea. And I forgot to mention, because I always get asked this question, so I'll just say it right now. So it's called the nutrition tea. I'm not like a tea fanatic. I get this question all the time. It's just more like giving, that saying, like giving the tea on something, like the gossip or whatever.
I got it.
So that's just putting that out there.
That's funny.
So anyway.
Are you a tea fanatic?
Yeah, because people, the questions that I get, I'm like, oh, I understand why you would think that, but no, that's not.
That's funny.
I'm like, I'm actually a coffee lover, but so it's the nutrition tea. Twitter, it's the same thing, the nutrition tea. I also have a Facebook page, the same name, and website, thenutritiontea.com. You can definitely email, like my info is all there for contact, and if you would like a session or just to say hi, I do read all my emails. So yeah, that's pretty much how to get in touch with me.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Shauna. This has been a really fun conversation. I appreciate you spending the time with me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Well, I sincerely hope you've enjoyed this conversation. If you haven't already, please go ahead and leave a review on iTunes. Thanks again so much for listening, and we'll see you soon for another episode.